Hello, it's me. It's cold and raining outside today, so I thought I'd come in my nice cosy story shed and read you another story. And today's story is called Big Top Benn. It's by David McKee. He's written loads of brilliant stories, but Mr. Benn is really a classic. This story is Big Top Benn. The sound of children laughing made Mr. Benn look out of his window in Festive Road. He soon saw the cause of the laughter. Young Julian was wearing a mask and amusing his friends. What a lovely sound, thought Mr. Benn. It must be fun to dress up and make people laugh. And with that, he remembered a costume shop that he knew, a special costume shop that adventures could start from. There must be an outfit to make me look funny, he thought, and he put on his hat and coat and set off for the shop. Now, Mr. Benn always wears a bowler hat, so I shall wear mine. As he walked, Mr. Benn remembered the adventures he'd had in the little shop. He reached the door and went in. When he saw the costumes again, he almost decided to try on something exciting instead of something funny. But before he did, as if by magic, the shopkeeper appeared. "Good morning, sir," he said. "What would you like to try today?" "Well," said Mr. Benn, "I rather thought I'd like to make people laugh." The shopkeeper smiled and showed Mr. Benn a baggy suit with a big bow tie. "See if it fits, sir," said the shopkeeper, and as Mr. Benn took the suit towards the changing room, he added, "This goes with it," and he handed him a false red nose. In the changing room, Mr. Benn put on the clothes. The suit was too big. The shoes were huge. But when he put on the false nose and looked in the mirror, he burst out laughing. "Perfect," he said, and walked to the door, not the one to the shop, but the one marked Trying Room. "I expect I'll come out in a circus," he thought. He was wrong. He came out into the open countryside, and nearby was a car, obviously intended for Mr. Benn. It could only be a clown's car. Mr. Benn jumped in and set off down the road. At first, it was just a pleasant country drive, but as Mr. Benn approached a bend in the road, the car started to behave oddly. It bounced and banged and steamed and squeaked and wriggled and rattled and behaved like a clown's car. At the same time, he came to a line of circus vehicles parked all along the road. There was just room to pass. At the front of the trucks stood the circus people with their backs to Mr. Benn. As he approached, they turned. He stopped the car, jumped out and tripped over. Everyone laughed. "Welcome," they said. "We can always use another clown." "Could," said a voice. "We could use another clown if we could reach the next place for a show." Then Mr. Benn noticed that the road was blocked by boulders that had fallen in a storm. "They're too big to move," sighed the ringmaster, "and we can't turn the trucks in this narrow road." "I can turn," said Mr. Benn. "I'll see what help I can get," and he drove off back down the road. Mr. Benn had hardly left the circus when he saw a man walking over a nearby hill. "Perhaps he knows where I can get some help," thought Mr. Benn, and drove towards him. As he came closer, Mr. Benn could see it was a very large man in a striped outfit. Mr. Benn recognised the man. It was Smasher Legrue, a convict he'd met on a previous adventure from the costume shop. "Smasher!" shouted Mr. Benn in delight and held out his hand. Smasher stared. He didn't recognise Mr. Benn in his clown's clothes, but then Mr. Benn lifted off the nose. "1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Benn!" shouted Smasher. "This is a surprise." He explained that he'd been let out of prison and was off to find an honest job. Mr. Benn laughed as he remembered that Smasher had got his name from smashing rocks in prison. "I've got a job for you," he said, and told Smasher about the circus. The circus people were disappointed to see Mr. Benn return with just one man, but when Smasher set to work with a sledgehammer, they gasped. As Smasher smashed, the circus people cleared all the small pieces of stone out of the way. "If you want a job, you could come with us," said the ringmaster. "You can be the strong man." Smasher was happy. Once the way was clear, the people started to cheer, but the cheers turned to groans. The road should have passed over a bridge, but the storm had destroyed that as well, and they were faced with a huge gap. "Don't worry," said Smasher. "I'll fill the gap with boulders." "That's no good," said Mr. Benn. "You'd stop the river flowing." Then everyone started to speak at once. The man who did tricks on stilts suggested making stilts for everybody. The tightrope walker wanted a rope across for them all to walk on. The balancing act wanted to balance pieces across the gap. Mr. Benn stopped them. "You are all thinking of ways that would get yourselves across," he said, "but that's not enough. Think of the elephants on stilts or trucks on tightropes. Even if we did manage to get everything across, what about the others who want to use this road? No, the circus works as a team, and as a team we must build a bridge. Firstly, we need wood to build with. Come on, there are plenty of trees back along the road." When enough trees were cut, they started to build the bridge. "We'll make it on this side and slide it across," Mr. Benn said. The ringmaster was worried. "When we push the bridge across, it will fall into the river," he said. The balancing lady spoke up. "Make it longer than we need, and the extra will stop it overbalancing. I'll watch it doesn't tip." They started to make the bridge. As soon as they'd made a part, they pushed a little over the edge. They built more onto it and pushed it a bit further. The more there was overhanging, the more there was on the side. The piece of bridge on the road was always longer. "It would be useful to have some help on the other side to guide the bridge," said Mr. Benn. The cowboy who did rope tricks lassoed a rock across the gap. The tightrope walker and trapeze artist soon crossed. The stilt man put on his longest stilts and stood in the river to help guide the bridge. They cut and they carried and they built and they pushed and they balanced and they guided and lifted and pulled until eventually the bridge crossed the gap. And now they all really did cheer. The circus procession crossed the bridge and made their way to the next town. In the town, the hard work started again as everyone set to putting up the big top, the circus tent. At last, everything was ready for the show to begin. Wow, look at all those people helping. The elephants are helping, Smasher is helping, the horses and ponies and clowns and tightrope walkers, everyone's helping. The circus started with the parade of all the stars and animals. Wow, look, who can you see? The elephant, the tumblers, the pantomime horse, people balancing, the lasso guy, a woman balancing on a horse, a man on a unicycle. There's Smasher carrying great weights. Some clowns, there's Mr. Benn in his clown car. Some people balancing and tumbling and juggling all at once. A man balancing a tray of drinks on his nose, and some tumblers and an elephant. Oh, and a lady with some trained dogs. My goodness, it looks amazing. Oh, there's the band in the corner. After the parade, the individual acts started. And when it was Smasher's turn, he was very popular. He was so strong. Mr. Benn was glad that he'd found a job to suit him. Look at him holding all those people up, and Mr. Benn as well. Then there was a magic act. Mr. Benn thought that he knew the magician, but he couldn't remember seeing him at the bridge. He was very good. He made things change shape or move from one place to another, or just suddenly appear. Oh, look. Wow, look at the tricks. Pulling loads and loads and loads and loads of silk hankies out of a tube. And look, he's making birds appear and flowers and even a cup. No, now he's pouring tea out of the tube and drinking it and making it disappear again. That's amazing. Balancing, making fire, doing card tricks. Wow. Then the magician said, I will now make a real live person vanish. Can I have a volunteer, please? Me, shouted Mr. Benn, and he drove into the ring. The car was doing its funny tricks. Look at it. It took ages for Mr. Benn to reach the magician, and how the crowd laughed. Step into this box, please, sir, said the magician. And Mr. Benn stepped into the brightly painted box. Inside the box, he was back in the changing room. He put on his own clothes and went into the shop, and there stood the smiling shopkeeper. Did you enjoy yourself, sir? He asked. Yes, thank you, said Mr. Benn, but there was a lot of hard work as well as laughs. And then he added, You're a very good magician. We can all do something, sir, said the shopkeeper. Mr. Benn was just about to leave when he realised he still had on the red nose. You can keep that as a souvenir if you like, said the shopkeeper. Thank you, said Mr. Benn as he waved goodbye. It will remind me not to wait too long before I come and see you again. How are you all doing? Good story. I hope you liked it. Always liked Mr. Benn. Always was a bit sad though when the shopkeeper would appear and Mr. Benn wouldn't recognise him, so he'd go where the shopkeeper said, like, oh, step into this cave or go in here. And then the adventure would be over and Mr. Benn would be back in the fancy dress shop. But the nice thing was that he could always go there again another day and go and dress up as something else and go and have a different adventure. I guess that's where I got the idea that I like dressing up from. Anyway, hope you're all well, and I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye.